We're live, baby. Chapter XVI, 18. Sorry, Roman numerals are not my strong suit. I'm not Roman, I'm English. Thank you very much. Chapter 18, titled Curdy's Clue. Curdy was as watchful as ever, but was almost getting tired of his ill success. Every other night or so, he followed the goblins about as they went on digging and boring and getting as near them as he could, watched them from behind stones and rocks. But as yet, he seemed no nearer finding out what they had in view, as at first he always kept hold of the end of his string, while his pickaxe, left just outside the hole by which he entered the goblins' country from the mine, continued to serve as an anchor and hold fast to the other end. The goblins, hearing no more noise in that quarter, had ceased to apprehend an immediate invasion and kept no watch. One night, after dodging about and listening till he was nearly falling asleep with weariness, he began to roll up his ball, for he had resolved to go home to bed. It was not long, however, before he began to feel bewildered. One after another, he passed goblin houses, caves that is, occupied by goblin families, and at length was sure there were many more than he had passed as he came. He had to use great caution to pass unseen, they lay so close together. Could his string have led him wrong? He still followed, winding it, and still it led him into more thickly populated quarters, until he became quite uneasy, and indeed apprehensive, for although he was not afraid of the cobs, he was afraid of not finding his way out. But what could he do? It was of no use to sit down and wait for the morning. The morning made no difference here. It was all dark, and always dark, and if his string failed him, he was helpless. He might even arrive within a yard of the mine and never know it. Seeing he could do nothing better, he would at least find where the end of the string was, and if possible, how it had come to play him such a trick. He knew by the size of the ball that he was getting pretty near the last of it, when he began to feel a tugging and pulling at it. What could it mean? Turning a sharp corner, he thought he heard strange sounds. These grew, and as he went on, to a scuffling and growling and squeaking, and the noise increased until, turning a second sharp corner, he found himself in the midst of it, and the same moment tumbled over a wallowing mass, which he knew must be a knot of the cob's creatures. Before he could recover his feet, he had caught some great scratches on his face, ouch, and several severe bites on his legs and arms. But as he scrambled to get up, his hand fell upon his pickaxe, and before the horrid beasts could do him any serious harm, he was laying about with it right and left in the dark, meaning he was swinging it all around. The hideous cries which followed gave him the satisfaction of knowing that he had punished some of them pretty smartly for their rudeness, and by their scampering and their retreating howls, he perceived that he had routed them. He stood a little, weighing his battle-axe in his hand as if it had been the most precious lump of metal, but indeed no lump of gold itself could have been so precious at that time as that common tool. Then untied the end of the string from it, put the ball in his pocket, and still stood thinking. It was clear that the cob's creatures had found his axe, had between them carried it off, and had so led him he knew not where. But, for all his thinking, he could not tell what he ought to do, until suddenly he became aware of a glimmer of light in the distance. Without a moment's hesitation, he set out for it, as fast as the unknown and rugged way would permit. Yet again, turning a corner, led by the dim light, he spied something quite new in his experience of the underground regions, a small, irregular shape of something shining. Going up to it, he found it was a piece of mica or Muscovy glass, called sheep silver in Scotland, and the light flickering as if from a fire behind it. For you children at home, mica is just a very shiny rock, often used as glass in ye old ancient medieval times. It's just a very shiny ore. After trying in vain for some time to discover an entrance to the place where it was burning, he came at length to a small chamber in which an opening high in the wall revealed a glow beyond. To this opening he managed to scramble up, and then he saw a strange sight. Below sat a little group of goblins around a fire, the smoke of which vanished in the darkness far aloft. The sides of the cave were full of shining minerals like those of the palace hall, and the company was evidently of a superior order. For every one wore stones about head or arms or waist, shining, dull, gorgeous colors in the light of the fire. Nor had Curdie looked long before he recognized the king himself, and found that he had made his way into the inner apartment of the royal family. He had never had such a good chance of hearing something. He crept through the hole as softly as he could, scrambled a good way down the wall toward them without attracting attention, and then sat down and listened. The king, evidently the queen, and probably the crown prince and the prime minister were talking together. He was sure of the queen by her shoes, for as she warmed her feet at the fire, he saw them quite plainly.
"Oh, that will be fun,"
said the one he took for the crown prince. It was the first whole sentence he heard.
"I don't see why you should think it such a grand affair,"
said his stepmother, tossing her head backward.
"You must remember, my spouse,"
interposed his majesty, as if making excuse for his son.
"he has got the same blood in him. His mother..."
"Don't talk to me of his mother. You positively encourage his unnatural fancies. Whatever belongs to that mother ought to be cut off him."
"You forget yourself, my dear,"
said the king.
"I don't,"
said the queen.
"Nor you either. If you expect me to approve of such coarse tastes, you will find yourself mistaken. I don't wear shoes for nothing."
"You must acknowledge, however,"
the king said with a little groan,
"that this of least is no whim of Harelip's, but a matter of state policy. You are well aware that his gratification comes purely from the pleasure of sacrificing himself to the public good. Does it not, Harelip?"
"Yes, Father, of course it does. Only it will be nice to make her cry. I'll have the skin taken off between her toes and tie them till they grow together. Then her feet will be like other people's, and there will be no occasion for her to wear shoes." "Oh, do you mean to insinuate I've got toes, you unnatural wretch?"
cried the queen, and she moved angrily toward Harelip. The counselor, however, who was betwixt them, leaned forward so as to prevent her touching him, but only as if to address the prince.
Your Royal Highness,"
he said,
"possibly requires to be reminded that you have got 3 toes yourself, 1 on one foot, 2 on the other."
shouted the queen triumphantly. The counselor, encouraged by his mark of favor, went on.
It seems to me, Your Royal Highness, it would greatly endear you and your future people, proving to them that you are not the less one of themselves that you had the misfortune to be born of a son mother, if you were to command upon yourself the comparatively slight operation which, in a more extended form, you so wisely meditate with regard to your future princess."
Laughed the queen, louder than before, and the king and the minister joined in the laugh. It was anything but a laughing matter to Harelip. He growled, and for a few moments the others continued to express their enjoyment of his discomfiture. Just a fancy word for discomfort. The queen was the only one Curdie could see with any distinctness. She sat sideways to him, and the light of the fire shone full upon her face. He could not consider her handsome. Her nose was certainly broader at the end than its extreme length, and her eyes, instead of being horizontal, were set up like 2 perpendicular eggs, one on the broad and the other on the small end. Her mouth was no bigger than a small buttonhole until she laughed, when it stretched from ear to ear, only to be sure her ears were very nearly in the middle of her cheeks. Anxious to hear everything they might say, Curdie ventured to slide down a smooth part of the rock just under him to a projection below, upon which he thought to rest. But whether he was not careful enough, or the projection gave way, down he came with a rush on the floor of the cavern, bringing with him a great rumbling shower of stones. The goblins jumped from their seats in more anger than consternation, which just means anxiety or nervousness, for they had never yet seen anything to be afraid of in the palace. But when they saw Curdie with his pick in his hand, their rage was mingled with fear, for they took him for the first of an invasion of miners. The king, notwithstanding, drew himself up to his full height of 4 feet, spread himself to his full breadth of 3.5, for he was the handsomest and squarest of all the goblins, and strutting up to Curdie, planted himself with outspread feet before him, and said with dignity,
"Pray, what right have you in my palace?"
"The right of necessity, your majesty,"
answered Curdie.
"I lost my way, and do not know where I was wandering to."
"How did you get in?"
"By a hole in the mountain."
"But you are a miner! Look at your pickaxe!"
Curdie did look at it, answering,
I came upon it lying on the ground, a little way from here. I tumbled over some wild beasts who were playing with it. Look, your majesty."
And Curdie showed him how he was scratched and bitten. The king was pleased to find him behave more politely than he had expected from what his people had told him concerning the miners, for he attributed it to the power of his own presence, but he did not therefore feel friendly to the intruder.
"You will oblige me by walking out of my dominions at once,"
he said, well knowing what a mockery lay in the words.
"With pleasure, if your majesty will give me a guide,"
said Curdie.
"I will give you 1,000,
said the king, with a scoffing air of magnificent liberality.
"One will be quite sufficient,"
said Curdie. But the king uttered a strange shout, half halloo, half roar, and in rushed goblins till the cave was swarming. He said something to the first of them, which Curdie could not hear, and it was passed from one to another, till in a moment the farthest in the crowd had evidently heard and understood it. They began to gather around him in a way he did not relish, and he retreated toward the wall. They pressed upon him.
"Stand back,"
said Curdie, grasping his pickaxe tighter by his knee. They only grinned and pressed closer. Curdie bethought himself and began to rhyme.
10, 20, 30, you're all so very dirty. 20, 30, 40, you're all so thick and snorty. 30, 40, 50, you're all so puff and snifty. 40, 50, 60, beastin' man so mixty. 50, 60, 70, mixty, maxty, 11ty. 60, 70, 80, all your cheeks so slaty. 70, 80, 90, all your hands so flinty. 80, 90, 100, all together done rig.
The goblins fell back a little when he began and made horrible grimaces all throughout the rhyme, as if eating something so disagreeable that it set their teeth on edge and gave them the creeps. But whether it was that the rhyming words were most of them no words at all, for a new rhyme being considered more efficacious or effective, Curdie had made it on the spur of the moment, or whether it was that the presence of the king and queen gave them courage, I cannot tell. But the moment the rhyme was over, they crowded on him again, and outshot 100 long arms, with a multitude of thick, nailless fingers at the end of them, to lay hold upon him. Then Curdie heaved up his axe, but being as gentle as courageous and not wishing to kill any of them, he turned the end which was square and blunt like a hammer, and with that came down a great blow on the head of the goblin nearest him. Hard as the heads of all goblins are, he thought he must feel that, and so he did, no doubt, but he only gave a horrible cry and sprung at Curdie's throat. Curdie, however, drew back in time, and just at that critical moment remembered the vulnerable part of the goblin body. Do you remember what it is? He made a sudden rush at the king, and stamped with all his might on his majesty's feet. The king gave a most unkingly howl, and almost fell into the fire. Curdie then rushed into the crowd, stamping right and left. The goblins drew back, howling on every side as he approached, but they were so crowded that few of them he attacked could escape his tread, and the shrieking and roaring that filled the cave would have appalled Curdie but for the good hope it gave him. They were tumbling over each other in heaps in their eagerness to rush from the cave when a new assailant suddenly faced them. The Queen, with flaming eyes and expanded nostrils, her hair standing half up from her head, rushed at him. She trusted in her shoes. They were of granite, hollowed like French sabots. A French sabot is one of those hollowed-out wooden shoes that peasants wear. I'm sure all of you peasants have your own pair. Curdie would have endured much rather than hurt a woman, even if she was a goblin, but here was an affair of life and death. Forgetting her shoes, he made a great stamp on one of her feet, but she instantly returned it with very different effect, causing him frightful pain and almost disabling him. His only chance with her would have been to attack the granite shoes with his pickaxe. But before he could think of that, she had caught him up in her arms and was rushing with him across the cave. She dashed him into a hole in the wall with a force that almost stunned him. But although he could not move, he was not too far gone to hear her great cry. And the rush of multitudes of soft feet, followed by the sounds of something heaved up against the rock, after which came a multitudinous patter of stones falling near him. The last had not ceased when he grew very faint, for his head had been badly cut and at least insensible. When he came to himself, there was perfect silence about him, and utter darkness, but for the merest glimmer in one tiny spot. He crawled to it, and found that they had heaved a slab against the mouth of the hole, past the edge of which a poor little gleam found its way from the fire. He could not move it a hair's breadth, for they had piled a great heap of stones against it. He crawled back to where he had been lying, in the faint hope of finding his pickaxe. But after a vain search, he was at last compelled to acknowledge himself in an evil plight. He sat down and tried to think, but soon fell fast asleep. And there was chapter 18. That was pretty stressful, huh, Rolfe?
Oh, the goblins chased them all the way, and then the Queen picked her up because she had the granite shoes, and Curdie couldn't hit her feet like he was hitting all the other goblins, and then she stashed them away into the wall.
Yep, that's pretty much all that happened, Rolfe. Are you ready to go on to the next one?
Yes, quickly. I need to know if Curdie is safe.
All right, calm down. Here we go. Chapter 19, titled Goblin Councils. He must have slept a long time, for when he awoke, he felt wonderfully restored. Indeed, he felt almost well, and he was also very hungry. There were voices in the outer cave. Once more, then, it was night, for the goblins slept during the day and went about their affairs during the night. In the universal and constant darkness of their dwelling, they had no reason to prefer the one arrangement to the other. But from their aversion to the Sun People, they chose to be busy when there was least chance of their being met either by the miners below when they were burrowing, or by the people of the mountain above when they were feeding their sheep or catching their goats. And indeed, it was only when the sun was away that the outside of the mountain was sufficiently like their own dismal regions to be endurable to their mole eyes. So thoroughly had they become disused to any light beyond that of their own fires and torches. Curdie listened, and soon found that they were talking of himself.
How long will it take?
Asked Harelip.
Not many days, I should think,
answered the king.
They are poor, feeble creatures, those Sun People, and want to be always eating. We can go a week at a time without food and be all the better for it. But I've been told they eat 2 or 3 times every day. Can you believe it? They must be quite hollow inside, not at all like us, 9/10 of whose bulk is solid flesh and bone. Yes, I judge a week of starvation will do for him.
If I may be allowed to have a word,
interposed the queen.
and I think I ought to have some voice in the matter.
The wretch is entirely at your disposal, my spouse. He is your property. You caught him yourself. We should never have done it.
The Queen laughed. She seemed in far better humor than the night before.
I was about to say,
She resumed,
that it does seem a pity to waste so much fresh meat.
What are you thinking of, my love?
said the King.
The very notion of starving him implies that we are not going to give him any meat, either salt or fresh.
I'm not such a stupid as that comes to,
returned Her Majesty.
What I mean is that by the time he is starved, there will hardly be a picking upon his bones.
The King gave a great laugh.
Well, my spouse, you may have him when you like,
he said.
I don't fancy him for my part. I am pretty sure he is tough eating.
That would be to honor instead of punish his insolence,
returned the Queen.
But why should our poor creatures be deprived of so much nourishment? Our little dogs and cats and pigs and small bears would enjoy him very much.
You are the best of housekeepers, my lovely Queen,
said her husband.
Let it be so by all means. Let us have our people in and get him out and kill him at once. He deserves it. The mischief he might have brought upon us, now that he has penetrated so far as our most retired citadel, is incalculable. Or rather, let us tie him hand and foot and have the pleasure of seeing him torn to pieces by full torchlight in the great hall.
Better! Better!
cried the Queen and Prince together, both of them clapping their hands. And the Prince made an ugly noise with his hair lip, just as if he had intended to be one at the feast.
But,
added the Queen, bethinking herself,
he is too troublesome. For as poor creatures as they are, there is something about those Sun People that is very troublesome. I cannot imagine how it is that with such superior strength and skill and understanding as ours, we permit them to exist at all. Why do we not destroy them entirely and use their cattle and grazing lands at our pleasure? Of course, we don't want to live in their horrid country. It is far too glaring for our quieter and more refined tastes. But we might use it for a sort of outhouse, you know. Even our creatures' eyes might get used to it, and if they did grow blind, that would be of no consequence, provided they grew fat as well. But we might even keep their great cows and other creatures, and then we should have a few more luxuries, such as cream and cheese, which at present we only taste occasionally, when our brave men have succeeded in carrying some off from their farms.
It is worth thinking of,
said the King.
And I don't know why you should be the first to suggest it, except that you have a positive genius for conquest. But still, as you say, there is something very troublesome about them. And it would be better, as I understand you to suggest, that we should starve him for a day or two first, so that he may be a little less frisky when we take him out.
Once there was a goblin living in a hole. Busy was a goblin, a shoe without a soul. By came a birdie, goblin, what do you do? Cobble at a sturdy upper leather shoe. What's the good of that, sir? Said the little bird. Why, it's very pat, sir, plain without a word. Where 'tis all a hill, sir, never can be holes. Why should their shoes have soles, sir, when they've got no soles?
Ugh! What's that horrible noise?
cried the Queen, shuddering from pot metal head to granite shoes.
I declare,
said the King with solemn indignation.
It's the sun creature in the hole!
Stop that disgusting noise!
cried the Crown Prince valiantly, getting up and standing in front of the heap of stones with his face toward Curdy's prison.
Do now, or I'll break your head!
Break away!
shouted Curdy, and began singing again.
Once there was a goblin living in a hole.
I really cannot bear it,
said the Queen.
If I could only get at this horrid toes with my slippers again.
I think we had better go to bed,
said the King.
It's not time to go to bed,
said the Queen.
I would if I was you,
said Curdie.
impertinent wretch.
Said the Queen, with the utmost scorn in her voice.
An impossible if,
said His Majesty with dignity.
Quite.
Returned Curdie, and began singing again.
Go to bed, Goblin do, help the Queen take off her shoe. If you do, it will disclose a horrid set of sprouting toes.
What a lie!
Roared the Queen in a rage.
By the way, that reminds me,
said the King,
that for as long as we have been married, I have never seen your feet, Queen. I think you might take off your shoes when you go to bed. They positively hurt me sometimes.
I will do just as I like,
retorted the Queen sulkily.
You ought to do as your hubby wishes you,
said the King.
I will not,
said the Queen.
Then I insist upon it,
said the King. Apparently, His Majesty approached the Queen for the purpose of following the advice given by Curdie. For the latter heard a scuffle and then a great roar from the King.
Will you be quiet then?
said the Queen wickedly.
Yes, Queen. I only meant to coax you.
Hands off!
cried the Queen triumphantly.
I'm going to bed. You may come when you like, but as soon as I am Queen, I will sleep in my shoes. It is my royal privilege. Hairlip, go to bed.
I'm going,
said Hairlip sleepily.
So am I,
said the King.
Come along then,
said the Queen.
and mind you are good, or I'll...
Oh, no!
Screamed the King in the most supplicating of tones. Curdie heard only a muttered reply in the distance, and then the cave was quite still. They had left the fire burning, and the light came through brighter than before. Curdie thought it was time to try again if anything could be done, but he found he could not get even a finger through the chink between the slab and the rock. He gave a great rush with his shoulder against the slab, but it yielded no more than if it had been part of the rock. All he could do was to sit down and think again. By and by, he came to the resolution to pretend to be dying, in the hope they might take him out before his strength was too much exhausted to let him have a chance. Then, for the creatures, if he could but find his axe again, he would have no fear of them, and if it were not for the Queen's horrid shoes, he would have no fear at all. Meantime, until they should come again at night, there was nothing for him to do but forge new rhymes, now his only weapons. He had no intention of using them at present, of course, but it was well to have a stock, for he might live to want them, and the manufacture of them would help to while away the time. And that was chapter 19. Whew! Looks like Curdie got himself into a bit of trouble.
So is he just going to be coming up with rhymes down in the cave?
Indeed, he said he might not need to use them right now, but it's always good to have plenty in mind.
But how is he going to get out?
I'm not sure yet, buddy, but unfortunately we have run out of time tonight to go through.
No! I need to know now!
Rolfe, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to wait, just like everybody else.
No, give me the book. I'll read it myself. Just give it to me.
No, Rolfe, give it back. You can't take the book. Rolfe, no.
Yes, finally! I'm going to open it up and read ahead. Wait a minute. I can't read.
Oh, all right, that's right.
Fine, I'll wait.
That's a good little boy, Rolfe.
Little Squire Boy.
Right, that's a good little Squire Boy, Rolfe.
Thank you.
All right, peasants of Camelmore, I know Curdie has got himself into quite the predicament, but I have a feeling that Irene might be coming to the rescue. For the next chapter, chapter 20, is titled Irene's Clue. Hopefully she'll be able to come and help Curdie. Well, until next time, peasants, sleep well and peasant better. Good night.
Good night.